dictionary definition of music is the art of arranging sounds in time through the elements of melody, harmony, rhythm, and timbre. Low Pass Filter is a show about the nature of this thing we call music, how it functions in people's lives, how it's contextualized by society, and why we find certain music meaningful. This is Low Pass Filter. Hello, and welcome to Low Pass Filter. My name is Mateo Noche, and I am joined by Low Pass Filter's co-host, Bandon Wayne. Hey, Bandon.
Hello.
Welcome. Well, we might as well get things kicked off today. We trade off on topics, and in this case, this is your topic. So why don't you explain to the folks at home what we're talking about today?
All right. Well, to be honest, even though I picked the topic, I still secretly hoped you would lead the conversation. You're better at it than I am, but I'm making light of it at the same time. I felt like it was something good to discuss at this point. Kind of the ongoing debate over digital versus analog or vice versa. In my thinking, it's maybe a little bit on the esoteric side, just how you feel about listening to music that was recorded in the analog way, or could say just music from the past. It's been, 30 to 40 years since we've had pretty strictly digital recording. Of course, some people choose to stay in the analog realm, but more and more it's just so much more accessible and convenient to do digital recording. But as a music nerd and working in a record store for so many years, it's a conversation that never ends. There's never a resolve to it. So it would be fun to discuss that, and then we'll also discuss some specific albums that were recorded in both of those ways and what the differences might be. For some albums, maybe a digital recording might be its best asset versus the analog, and vice versa. So a lot to discuss. We'll see how much we can get in. And
so it might help at this point in time to discuss terms. So what we're talking about when we talk about analog and digital recordings. And of course, analog came first, and in its purest form, it really was a completely analog process where our sound, music, voice was fed into a bell, which went through some pipes and went down into a little stylus and actually cut into wax or some other sort of malleable substance, and there was really nothing in between the sound and the little scratches that it made in the whatever the medium might have been at the time.
Indeed.
And then of course, as we all know, then came things like wire recorders, which a lot of people don't know about now, but before there was tape recorders, there were wire recorders, which were essentially long pieces of wires on spools, and you changed the magnetic properties of that spool, and you had yourself a recording. Fairly low fidelity, although towards the end of their run, they started approaching what was to come next, which would have been tape. So the magnetophone machine was invented by they like to say the Nazis, but it was invented during World War II, and was used with a ferrite coated paper, which was on a spool and went through and was magnetized and demagnetized to erase. That whole thing was basically captured at the end of the war And this guy named Bing Crosby brought them over to the United States, and a company that he helped start called Ampex started reverse engineering and building these machines. So by the late 40s, early 50s, you had the first Ampex 100, which was a mono tape recorder. And that really started off the electronic recording of analog material. And then fast forward 40 years to the early 70s, there was a process that they came up with called digital recording, in which sound and visuals and video later was recorded to a series of zeros and ones. So there was absolutely no music involved in what went down on at the time, which was tape. That was still the recording medium, was ironically was analog tape, but it had a series of zeros and ones. And then those were retrieved and decoded and brought the music back to our ears. So those are the two forms of analog versus digital.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's so fascinating. Yeah, so between these two worlds of analog and digital, the end result is to create a vibrational wave, a sound wave. So regardless of how it's being recorded and processed, it's still, the end result is sending a sound wave to our ears. So ultimately, it's what you want in the end, but it's how you get there that has kind of created this ongoing conversation. As far as tape goes, man, we're not even talking about the stylus of a record player that plays an etched groove that translates that vibrational pattern. We're talking about a magnetic field where particles are moved into position, and that creates the pattern that is then interpreted into a sound wave. So that's another subcategory within the analog realm that's quite fascinating.
Right. When people talk about LPs sound better than CDs, for example, what a lot of people don't understand is that there is so much noise introduced into the process of taking that from tape to an LP. Things like wow and flutter, and of course, the tape has an inherent hiss to it, which they used a lot of schemes to lower that, namely Dolby. Dolby Systems, Dolby A, which was a professional noise reduction system. But you have things like table rumble, and then just the quality of the vinyl and the quality of the mastering, So when you start digging down into what might be better and if one is better than the other, a lot depends on the whole process from beginning to end of what you end up getting to listen to. They say that, people say they can tell the difference between analog and digital recordings, but that hasn't borne out in any sort of tests that they've done. They've not been able to show that anyone can actually discern an analog from digital. So if you accept that, then a lot of what we're talking about is just purely psychoacoustics, just people what they think sounds better and think should sound better. Yeah, exactly. And like I kind of said, this conversation has been going on so long, and working in a record store for years, and of course you've been involved in many aspects of creating music and working to produce it and all those things.
So we both have been having these conversations for years and years, and you ultimately end up with kind of like, well, I guess we'll have to agree to disagree. Or after you've made all these points, you go, okay, well, does that really add up to one is better than the other? And kind of what you were touching on, I think, is the discernment of it. It's scientifically known that we have a limitation on frequency range that we can perceive with our eardrums. And some of those other details in it, really does make it ultimately kind of a moot point. But for some reason, we develop a feeling about certain recordings, or the format itself. When I listen to it on vinyl, it just sounds better to me. And you got some people that go, well, I listened to vinyl for years, and finally when CDs came along, oh, what an improvement. It sounded so much crisper, or I could hear things that I couldn't hear in the vinyl transcription. So
that's certainly true. The hiss and wow and clutter and table rumble and all that sort of thing had a tendency to swallow up certain parts of it, and or just sort of make an amalgam of everything you heard. And in some cases that was great. That just really added to the flavor of what you were listening to. In other cases, not so much. There are, and then the other thing is when you talk about analog versus digital, if you talk about things that were recorded and mastered in the analog realm and then taken into the digital realm, the things that happen to it along the way, can have a great bearing on what it sounds like to you. And like, for example, I have on my list, I have 7 Seas of Rhyme, which is, or of Rye, which is off Queen 2, which is one of my all-time favorite records in the entire world. Yet, if you listen to the CD transcription of it, it is just a complete mess. There are just, the levels are completely bounds. The things are put in weird different places. It just sounds completely weird and disjointed. And that's because a lot of what Queen 2 was just kind of a murky record, and those things could hide out and just kind of all sit there together. But until you really heard what you had, through a CD, then you might not be that happy with the way digital recordings happen. Also, Nirvana, the remaster of Nevermind they used something called brick wall limiting, which is about the worst thing I think that ever happened to music, in my opinion, which is just essentially makes everything in the recording come up at the same level. Even top parts really are creating the same level. I like music that's dynamic, that has the soft and lows, and and especially a band like Nirvana, that our whole deal was loud and soft, right? So what you end up with a lot of the, at least in the original transfers to CD, was just kind of this loud mess, So.
Yeah, and unfortunately, not to get too into it, but the Nirvana Nevermind has always been a perplexing recording because it was representing very loud, distorted rock music, but it still felt thin. It felt like there was still more ceiling, and it was compressed to the middle, and it was always a bit frustrating. I suppose if we had, big multi-band equalizers hooked up to our stereo system, maybe we could have made it sound better. Oddly, though, today I find that recording more appealing than I did when it came out. Somehow I kind of recognize the beauty of what it is.
One of the reasons that happened is something called the RIAA curve.
Okay.
which is something that when the mastering engineer gets down to putting creating the final copy that will be mastered to vinyl to make the metal mother that will be used to create the LPs, they use something called the RRAA curve. It's a complicated process, but in the end, what they're trying to do is not allow the grooves to run into each other. If they allow too much, especially bottom, if they allow too much bottom into the grooves, then they become too wide. You have to separate them farther and farther. You can get less material onto an LP, right? And that is why you had 12-inch singles. That's why you had 10-inch singles, because the mastering engineers remastered those so they could get the bottom out of that. But on a 45-minute, 45-minute LP, you couldn't do that because you would soon run out of space. You would not be able to put all the material on there. And so you're absolutely right that there is more to there, but they have to limit it in order to put it down on a vinyl record. At least they did when that record came out.
Yeah, it did have the same effect on the cassette tape. I thought the cassette might have been a little warmer sounding, I think we know that Butch Vig's engineering process, that was somehow a product of his insight into how to translate Nirvana's sound. I don't think he necessarily regrets it, but that album always has had that stigma with it for some odd reason, which I think is kind of why Nirvana's third and final album was a complete different production value. And that one is so hot, it screams off the record. And so.
Let's take a break right now, and we'll be right back. And we'll be right back with more Low Pass Filter. All right, welcome back. So it seemed like only seconds.
Yeah, I was just going to compliment your shirt. That's a fabulous shirt, man. You're rocking it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm trying not to look like like I usually do. So let's jump into the list, and maybe let's start off with analog. And why don't you talk about some of your favorite analog recordings?
All right. Well, the first one on my list, I think, is a recording that is one of the most widely regarded, indisputably well-recorded albums, and I'm sure it's on both of our lists. That's Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. An album that I've joked over the years has needed no remastering. Any concept of let's remaster this to somehow improve its fidelity just seems unnecessary. It really stands the test of time. Talk about dynamics. There's moments in that record that drop so low that you'd have to really put your ear to the speaker to hear it. But that's just part of the artistry of their concept of music on that record, and it takes you on such a roller coaster journey in audio sonic sound, and so that would be a whole episode in itself to talk about Dark Side of the Moon. But 1973, we also know that Alan Parsons was the engineer on that recording, and goodness, it's hard to get much higher than that for a rock record, to have that kind of acoustic envelope and sonic depth, and if you've ever put that on in the pitch black dark and laid on the floor and listened to it, it's a full sensory experience.
Oh yeah. And just about everybody's list as one of the best recordings of all time. Definitely one of the best rock recordings of all time.
Something special.
Yep.
So from there, we jump ahead 9 years to 1982, Toto's album titled 4, which has their probably biggest hit, Africa, at least their most enduring hit song. I don't know too much about the process in the recording of that. Obviously, the band members were high caliber musicians, but there is just a sonic soundscape to that, even though it's to some people's ears kind of soft rock or kind of light rock of the era. Some people might even put it in kind of next to the yacht rock sound. They're not quite on the level creatively as Steely Dan maybe, but great musicianship. And so whether you love Toto or like that album or not, sonically it's just huge and it's really pleasing. And I think it's one of those records that falls onto the list of what people use to test their stereo equipment when they get new equipment. What's the album I put on first? I put on Toto 4, or a few other ones that you hear about. So that one I thought had to be on the list. 2-inch analog tape, and you think about, for recordings like that, all of the creative engineering, pre-mixing, splicing of tape to add things to the mix, overdubs. But yeah, it's just got that kind of crystal clear but big, and fills the room and your brain with sound waves.
Yeah, say what you want about Toto. I think they always had the sonic thing going on. I think from the very first record, I think of their song "Hold the Line," which is, I think, maybe their first hit, and that was it was a monster. It was just really had one of those things where you can hear everything, right, and hear it the way it was intended to be heard. So and they also, I think they shared a lot of the same personnel with Steely Dan, so I think they had some of the same people working on these records, that because they're all studio cats, and they're all kind of going around in the same groups. But yeah, they really had it going on. Yeah,
indeed.
And I should mention, I'll just stop you right here and mention that for people that are watching us, you can find our playlist down here in the description, and you can listen along as we go. And just with the proviso that Spotify may have done all kinds of unearthly things to whatever it is we're going to play. So the characteristics that we're talking about might not necessarily be present in whatever Spotify has put online. So that's just a disclaimer for everyone there.
That's a good point. Not to mention that we are using Spotify strictly as a means to an end.
Yep.
It's the only real way for us to share the examples of what we're talking about and give a playlist for people to check.
Without paying.
Yeah, I actually am on a premium Spotify subscription because I made a big playlist for my sweetheart and wanted her to be able to listen to it without commercials.
And it's Valentine's Day, so the perfect gift.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. But dang you, Spotify. So next on my list was Steely Dan's Asia. And gosh, I know how you feel about that record without you even telling me. I'm sure you love the heck out of it. I think we both love all Steely Dan records. Side note on Steely Dan, they still seem to be one of the most contentious bands in terms of love or hate, or people thinking they're cool and some people thinking they're absolutely dorky. I don't get it.
I don't completely get that in the year 2022. Maybe in 1980, when the punk aesthetic came in and people were rebelling against things like Steely Dan and the whole lo-fi movement and all that. I can see that then, but I think there's in the world that we live in right now. I mean, to go back, they're not even a band. I mean, they're still touring, or Donald Fagen is still touring with whatever's left of Steely Dan. But they're not a hit maker anymore. They're not charting records anymore. So I don't understand people holding on to the resentment. I kind of sort of understood it, in 1981, but I'm not sure I totally get it now.
Well, believe me, when I discovered Steely Dan, I was as surprised as anyone that I was falling in love with it. I came to it after I already was into heavy metal, punk, lo-fi music, anti-establishment music. But my buddy who felt the same way I did about most things musical, he loved them, and I went, okay, you like this a lot. Well, I'll give it a chance. Anyway, I quickly fell in love with them. I've loved them for almost 30 years. We could go on and on about that, but the point is the musicianship, and then what they did to record the best, highest level of sonic fidelity, dynamics. The individual components that went into each song were just so carefully thought out in terms of how they would sound in the end product. It's also clear, and Asia among Steely Dan records is seemingly the highest peak of that for them, and the process. I mean, you know a lot about this too. The process was arduous, to say the least.
They were, the soundtrack of my life, really. So they really were in my formative years. They were there at every moment, basically. And I picked a different record because I knew that Asia would come up, but I picked Gaucho.
Yep.
She was also Asia might be better recorded. I don't know, but Gaucho is definitely a close second as far as recording. And I had in my playlist, I had Babylon Sisters, which is one of my favorite all-time songs by them. They got burned on a record called Katy Lied, which turned out sonically way worse than they had hoped. They had problems with the tape machine. They almost lost the master. It just got run through the machine so many times that it became paper thin. It lost all sorts of fidelity, and they swore on the grave of that record that they would never make another record that way, and that they would take every step they could to make sure that it was sonically great. Because the records that came before that were terrific. Can't Buy a Thrill is really well recorded. Yeah. But I had that, and then for the analog side, and then I had The Nightfly, which is Donald Fagen's first solo record, which is also listed as one of the first DDD recordings. Now, it did actually come out on LP first because there weren't commercially available CDs at the time, but it was among the first records that was digitally recorded, digitally mastered, and then released as a CD. So there were other records that were recorded before But ironically, I think Ry Cooder is like the first all digital recording. But of course, that was released on LP.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Kind of ironically. But yeah, you were talking about people that have a commitment to high production values, and why that's a bad thing, I don't really understand.
I've been on the other side of the fence, where, as much as I respected high quality recordings, I needed to know the other side of that, and I needed to feel the other side of that, because there is a whole other level of intimate musical communication that can be devoid of the technology. You've listened to things that probably were recorded on a boombox or a cassette recorder with just 2 microphones, and you went, that's it. That's exactly what it needs to be. One great thing about the comparison between Steely Dan and the sort of punk anti-movement that we enjoyed was that the Minutemen covered a Steely Dan song. So we knew if they covered Steely Dan, they had to be cool. And also, you are right about Gaucho, because I think that is even a better recording than Asia. Ultimately, the sonic quality of it is just unreal. And I think that was the one that they actually almost just all died as people trying to make that record happen. I've read the story about it, and it was crazy.
Yeah, overdubs, guitar overdubs. It's like, let's go for 201.
Yeah. And moving to different studios, mastering in different places, all that stuff. It's also funny to think of how many musicians they would bring in to play the same parts to decide which take they wanted. And those musicians had no idea that was going on. Some of them. So they didn't know if they were going to end up on the record or not. But anyway, yeah, Steely Dan's quite a juggernaut of intensity.
So one of my favorite of all times is a song called Chain of Fools by Aretha Franklin. Now, Aretha Franklin, went to Muscle Shoals and recorded this just fabulous material. One of the things about her vocals is that she almost always overloaded her vocals. That was part of her sound, was basically overwhelming a ribbon microphone with her sound. But that is just such a warm, everything is there. Everything is crystal clear. There's so much bottom. I mean, you could, without even talking about what a fabulous in the pocket sort of, musical experience that we're talking about. But from a recorded standpoint, analog recording, it's just wonderful and warm. And I just love that to death. Also on my list is a song called Hey Boy, Hey Girl by Louis Prima, and with Sam Butera and the Witnesses and Keely Smith.
Uh-huh.
Just another one of those recordings that's, I don't think it'd be on anybody's list really of an analog of their favorite songs, but it's just one of those things that it just sounds so alive. It jumps off the groove, and you're just, it's just everything they're doing there is so present, and it just sparkles, and it was a mono recording. This is pre-stereo. And it just a wonderful recording. And then I've got Son of a Preacher Man, Dusty Springfield, from a wonderfully recorded record called Dusty in Memphis, where every little bit of that record is just a sonic bounty, really. It just doesn't, you just doesn't get any better than that. And of course, they've really re-released on CD the almost a whole nother album's worth of material that wasn't on the original Dusty in Memphis recording, and all of it is just completely brilliant. So,
yeah, I'm so glad you brought that kind of stuff up. Sorry to talk over you. I'm glad you brought up recordings like that. I didn't go back that far, honestly, because it was kind of overwhelming to my ears. So many recordings from that era, from the 50s and 60s, even before that. I mean, you could go back to the 30s and 40s. The purity of it, like you talked about the ribbon microphone, the ability to engineer a recording with only 3 or 4 track tape, to have to know where to place those microphones, because there isn't going to be post-production. There isn't going to be overdubbing. And to capture everything so cleanly, have it mixed so well, and not have any sonic disturbance, not have any noise disturbance, to hear those drums so clearly, even though there's no, set aside 8 tracks to be able to manipulate later and refine the levels and add any kind of filtering like reverb and things like that. It's amazing. And you're right, man. The piano on Son of a Preacher Man, just so bold.
Let me give you 2 more before we do that. And then staying back in the 50s and jumping off on what you were talking about the way these things were recorded, is Frank Sinatra in the wee small hours of the morning. Now, this was a recording that was made with what they call a Decatree. And a Decatree is 3 microphones, a center, and right and left, that's hoisted on a mic stand, usually one that's 20 feet tall, and is brought up in front of the orchestra, the singer, and the audience, or not the audience, but the orchestra and the singer, and then was recorded to either a stereo machine or a mono machine, or sometimes both. You often have both of them going at the same time, and then just a very simple mix. But in this period of time, the studio itself was an instrument. The studio itself had a lot to do with the sounds of these recordings. So if you were in a good room that had the right kinds of reflections and acoustics and dead spots and live spots, I mean, you would put your drummer in a certain place, you would put the strings in a certain place. Hearkening back to the days of recording into a horn, if somebody was too loud, you would put them out in the hallway. You would just keep backing them off physically until the blend sounded right in your headphones. But this is one of those things, one of those recordings that just it's very low key. It's very intimate, as a lot of Sinatra was. And just everything comes through that they intended to come through. And the last one I'll give you before we take a break, we both had this record, which is another one that is on, I think, just about everybody's all-time best records of any kind, is Pet Sounds. And you could do a whole show on Pet Sounds, but we won't be doing that today. But my song off of Pet Sounds was Caroline No, which is just just amazing. And everything on the record is amazing, of course, but that one is a personal favorite of mine.
You can't talk anything bad about that song. It's a beautiful song. If you love the Beach Boys and that record, or just that kind of sweet emotion in a song. My pick off of Pet Sounds for the longest time is I'm Waiting for the Day. A lot of people go for God Only Knows. I'm waiting for the day. I think beside the lyrical content and the melody, of course, Brian Wilson is just so, kind of reaching from down deep. His emotional, I don't know what you call it. He's a young man with a lot of feelings about love and stuff. But that song sounds like someone's playing timpani in it, and the resonance of that and the way that was recorded and fills up the space of that song is just amazing.
Well, let's take a quick break, and we'll come back in just a minute. Okay, welcome back. Low Pass Filter. Just got through talking about our analog favorites. Maybe we should talk about some digital favorites. I think I saw some cross some things that we both had on our list. So why don't you give me what you have on your digital list?
Cool. Yeah, I wish I could have dug up more in the digital realm. Of course, so many albums have been made digitally in the last 30 plus years. I came across this. I hadn't thought about this album, but I came across an article featuring Vespertine by Bjork, which was from 2001. And as soon as I saw that, I knew that was an appropriate one for my list, because that album really blew me away when it came out, the sonic quality of it. Previous to that album by Bjork, which I'm sure there's a lot of digital work in there, there was more of a bombastic quality to her stuff. It was more kind of club beats in a lot of it. Not all of it, though. She was always able to go into other dynamic spaces. But Vespertine has much more of this kind of dreamy, lush quality throughout it. And there are songs where the bass line is just, it has this whole otherworldly quality to it. And it's just the perfect bed for Bjork to really get across her more delicate side.
Let me jump in there. I also had this record, and I had the song "It's Not Up to You," which I just can't get enough of. It's just so lush and so dreamy, and I don't know. There's just something about the quality, and of course, I love her as a singer. She's a lot of my favorite singers are belters, that can really dig down and really put it out, and she does that in that song, and actually always, but in that song in particular, and just it still retains just this wonderful, clear quality. And that record, I'm a big fan of that one. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, not at all, man. Yeah, and I think that's a record that it's mastered well enough that you could play it on a modest stereo system and it's going to sound wonderful. But if you played it through a high quality stereo system, really nice speakers, it could, really blow your mind. What more can you say? Bjork, she's always pushing the boundary of where she can go with recording, even the instruments used to record, different techniques for recording. So it's not surprising that she would accomplish such a feat.
Happens to be on tour at the moment.
Oh yes.
And a friend of mine saw her in LA last week and said it was one of the best concerts she's ever seen. So, you know.
I believe it. I've seen live concert footage of her that, yeah, it especially if it was a more intimate space, if, you know, you just think, man, if I could have been there, that would have been amazing. Yeah, man. What else do you have on your digital list?
A couple fairly new things. The Black Star, the David Bowie last record. I have Lazarus from that on there. Just, I don't know. Bowie, of course, has always had, well, I won't say he always had high quality recordings, but this one is particularly high quality and just amazing for someone's last record, someone who was dying of cancer, you know, as he was recording this. But I just really love the sound of the recording. The other thing I have is Let England Shake, which is PJ Harvey's Mercury Prize winning record. Also a sonic treat in every way, I think. And what else? That's kind of, I have let's see. Oh, Alabama Shakes.
Yeah.
Give Me All Your Love. Another one of those things that sounds like it could have been recorded at Muscle Shoals.
Okay. Yeah, I saw that on your list, and that jumped out at me because I definitely know who they are, but I'm not too familiar. I've listened to some of their stuff, and they are a modern band with some intention to you know, harken back to the 60s, it seems. So yeah, they're good at doing that. Some bands not as much, others seem to really capture that in a natural way, so that's a good thing.
I was surprised that you had Charlotte Gainsbourg on here, the IRM record, which I like a lot. I have it and I enjoy it very much. Why don't you tell us why you picked that one?
Okay. Well, the song that I put in the playlist, the Collection Use, very sonically pleasing to me. Kind of similar to the way that Bjork Vespertine feels, but also that album was produced and put together by Beck. You know, so it was a collaboration. Charlotte Gainsbourg, following in her mother's footsteps, just sings the songs. She's not a songwriter. She's not a composer. She's not a musician per se. She sings the songs, which in the French tradition of pop music, she would be a chanteuse, I suppose. But this album in particular really harkens to what her dad, Serge Gainsbourg, records sounded like, especially at his peak of kind of cutting edge cool of his era. And clearly Beck has studied Serge Gainsbourg records and really tried to bring that across. So that record by Charlotte sounds very modern, but it has very obvious hearkenings to, let's say, probably the most notable of Serge's albums would be Histoire de Melody Nelson, or The History of Melody Nelson, which, by the way, is way too short of a record. It's an amazing record, but it's only like 26 minutes long or something like that. Anyway, so yeah, that I was just trying to come up with things that jumped out at me at some point, and you could almost see that being an analog record. I'm sure if Beck wanted to, he could have accomplished something like that. But, still it was recorded digitally. But yeah, I love that record. When that came out, it really blew me away. It's not necessarily my favorite Charlotte Gainsbourg record, but it's awesome.
I like the record he did with Sly and Robbie and Rita Marley, Hugs Arms, something or other. I can't bring it. I can't call it up right now. But they came out with an expanded version of that with the dub versions of everything. And that is a very warm, I'm sure it was recorded analog, so it's a very warm sounding record, and very, just everything is there in the way it should be, so.
Quick story about that, if I can. Yes, his Serge Gainsbourg doing a reggae record sounds odd, but it works. His vocals work very well with it, and working with Sly and Robbie, you've got some of the best musicians and producers in that genre. But the dub mixes, man, one time I had that committed to an iPod that I had hooked up to a boom box, and I took that on a camping trip, and I listened to those dub mixes in the forest late at night, and man, that was an experience.
Yeah. Well, with just about 5 minutes left, let's kind of wind things up. And, the thing that, again, kind of circling back to what we started talking about in the beginning, which was the whole analog versus digital debate. For me personally, and you just mentioned something, one of my favorite things to do, which is to listen to things on a boombox in the middle of the forest, there is this sort of psychoacoustic properties to things that especially music that you're really familiar with. And for me, I can listen to things on whatever little tin box is fitted with, it doesn't really matter, because my mind fills in the blanks. My brain, and I think this is true of a lot of people, brings back all of the fidelity that's definitely is not there, especially off of something like a cassette. Even though I love cassettes, don't send me any notes. But there's just a very limited frequency range there, so it's just not going to contain the information that, say, a CD does, or even maybe an LP might. But your brain kind of fills in these bits, and this is why it's so tricky to try and go analog versus digital, because especially if it's material that you already know, right? Your brain is already backfilling, in the spots that may be missing or deficient from any recording. Yeah. So I'm not really sure one is better than the other. I just know, working as a musician, as a producer and a recording engineer, that Pro Tools is a lot less fiddly than the days when I would have to align Dolby A for a 24-track machine, have to align a tape machine, mess with fiddly channel cards. I mean, there were times when we would have to pull channel cards out of one channel and stick it into another to record, and so they're just from the janky sort of standpoint, analog, it was a process that was very involved and very technically oriented, and sort of some black magic thrown in there too, some voodoo thrown in as well, whereas digital, I think if you have the right front end, meaning you have the right preamp and you have the right microphones and you're using them correctly, I think you're going to get results a lot quicker and a lot more reliably. Yeah,
I would agree. I mean, it's one of those things too. I'm not sure what quite what the right expression is, but once you advance to a certain point, or once you let a cat out of a bag, you can't go back. Not as easily. What it took people to understand how to record to analog tape, it required training, it required experience and learning lots of ins and outs and working with all kinds of equipment. To think of having to go backward to learn those skills just so that you could accomplish, something that you think sounds like what you love about vintage recording, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Once you have Pro Tools, once you have that kind of accessibility, things like filtering and EQing and stuff that would be done on a massive board and done with various different reel-to-reel players and all those kinds of things. If you can do that on a screen now, why would you go back? It's kind of a lost art. Not to say that it would be uncool to do that if that's what you believe in. I'd hate to see that stuff disappear forever. Ultimately, when having these conversations and talking about, well, when sound waves are turned into digital code, you think that something is lost there. It's retranslated into sound waves and they vibrate the cone of a speaker or your little earbuds or whatever it is that then goes to your eardrum. And today, kind of almost an inside joke about choosing vinyl records over CDs or listening to music on digital streaming is that you're not listening to true analog anyway. It's a vinyl transcription of a digitally processed recording. Even if it started being recorded on analog tape, it was probably processed into digital for mastering and then retranscribed onto an analog format. So I'll end with, whenever I had those conversations with people and especially if you were talking to somebody that was a proponent of digital transcribing, listening to a CD, I would just end up saying, well, maybe my soul just knows the difference. I'm listening to a vinyl recording and my soul just knows that it's a closer transcription of the original sound waves that were created by instruments and amplifiers and all of that. So you kind of end up it's a zero-sum kind of thing, I guess.
Yeah. That's a good way to end. Thanks so much, Bandon. And I want to thank everybody out there for joining us on Low Pass Filter. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell to find out when we post new episodes of this. You can contact us at lowpassfilter2020@gmail.com. And you can also use the comment sections below to suggest new topics or tell us that we're full of doo-doo or whatever, whatever catches your fancy. But Bandon, thanks again for being here, man. And
Thank you.
We'll see you next time on Low Pass Filter.
Thanks for watching Low Pass Filter. Contact the hosts at lowpassfilter2020@gmail.com. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell to be notified about future shows.